As we mentioned earlier, Donald Trump released the names of 11 people he says he'd consider for the Supreme Court. Here to discuss whether his picks will be enough to pacify nervous conservatives is NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams. Joins us from Washington and makes his debut on this program, which has us overjoyed. Pete, thank you for joining us here.
You have a very low overjoy threshold.
No, this is an honor for us. So 11 names. Which ones jump out at you as symbolically important or interesting to think about what signals they send?
Well, he's already said, Donald Trump, that he'd consider two of the names on the list, appeals court judges William Pryor of Alabama and Dianne Sykes of Wisconsin. Like the other four federal judges on this list, they were put on the bench by President George W. Bush. Judge Sykes was once married. This is a little unusual here. Judge Sykes was once married to Milwaukee talk show host Charlie Sykes, who supported Ted Cruz. Pryor is among the most conservative on the list. The other five are state Supreme Court justices, including Thomas Lee of Utah. He's the brother of Utah Republican Senator Mike Lee, who was Ted Cruz's biggest Senate supporter, both the sons of former Solicitor General Rex Lee, who served in the Reagan administration.
So it's a pretty blue chip list of the names I know, and as I've read about them, it seems like these are all names of people who conservatives can look at and get the exact signal Trump wants to send, right? These are strict constructionalists who could be seen as in the mold of a Scalia in terms of judicial philosophy, right?
Yes, and I suppose the Trump people will be pleased by the response they're getting. The conservative groups are saying, well, it's a good list. Can we trust Trump to stick with it? But that's sort of an endorsement of the list. And then the liberal groups are saying this is a terrible list, which I assume is going to be pleasing to the Trump people. But I suspect it's intended to do two things: appeal to conservatives who would find it to be satisfactory that they're all sound, respected conservative, and perhaps reassure others in the party, because none of these people on the list are so far out that they're beyond the conservative mainstream.
Pete, are there any names that don't appear on the list and jump out at you?
Yeah, that's the surprising thing to me, because there are several names that you would think would be on any Republican's list. Paul Clement, the former Solicitor General under George W. Bush, now in private practice, one of the most prominent Supreme Court litigators. He argued the Hobby Lobby case. He represented the House Republicans who were opposed to same-sex marriage. Brett Kavanaugh of the D.C. Circuit, a former clerk to Justice Anthony Kennedy, former deputy to Ken Starr during the Clinton investigation, in the White House counsel's office under George W. Bush. Two other appeals court judges, Tom Griffith of the D.C. Circuit and Neil Gorsuch of the 10th Circuit, who's a former Kennedy clerk. And some of those names, Kavanaugh and I think Clement, were on the Heritage Foundation list that came out earlier this year that Trump's people said they looked at.
Yeah. As I look at these, again, the ones I'm familiar with, there's a range of ages here, but it seems to me that some of the people he left off are on the younger end of names that people consider. Is that a big issue for conservatives, that they want someone, the next Republican president, to nominate younger justices so they can stay on the bench for a longer period of time?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the people who really work at this, like the Federalist Society, and I would say this is really not a Federalist Society list, or you'd certainly see Clement and Brett Kavanaugh on it. That's been one of their things, to put younger people, get them nominated to the courts of appeals, because if you look at the recent Democratic nominees, the Obama nominees, they're all pretty young. Of course, John Roberts was young when he was nominated as well. So that's been the current trend, to try to get younger justices on so that they can serve longer. I got to say one other thing about one surprising name on this list. Don Willett, who is one of the state Supreme Court justices on the list. Maybe he's on because he's a prolific tweeter, and maybe that appeals to the Trump people. But his tweets have pretty much been anti-Trump. He sort of mocks Trump in the tweets and said that he was, you know, it would bring tears to your eyes if you could see Trump's list of potential Supreme Court nominees, and now I are one.
There's two choices. Either they didn't know, or they have a twisted sense of humor, one or the other.
Mark, is there any, it's interesting, Pete mentioned if we can trust him on this list. Yeah. Is this the one area, because a lot of people feel Trump in his soul is a moderate, we know his kids, and particularly when it comes to women's rights issues, that he's just putting this list out, and once he's president, he's going to do whatever the hell he pleases?
Well, that's always been the fear.
But more so with this guy than anybody.
But no one, Pete, check me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember any nominee putting out a list like this. I've heard them talk about which current justices or past justices they like, or maybe one or two names of sitting jurists, but I don't remember any nominee putting out a list, and it does go to the question of, can Trump satisfy people with just a list as opposed to some sort of more ironclad commitment?
Well, it's unusual for that reason, and also, you know, we don't know whether any of the people on this list were asked by the Trump campaign if they would be willing to be considered, willing to have their names out there publicly. I mean, the downside to having your name on this list is only if he does stick with this list, there's only going to be one person chosen. Do you want to be one of the also-rans? I mean, there are lots of odd questions that the list raises, but you've mentioned a couple of them.
And just to go back to the ones who were left off, you said, I think correctly, that these are a group of sort of mainstream center-right judges and justices and people who the conservative groups will like. Is there any difference between their judicial philosophy and the people he left off? Are they, for instance, more moderate in some way than a Clement or Kavanaugh?
Paul Clement's pretty conservative. Brett Kavanaugh is pretty conservative. I can't think of something in their past that would leave them off the list.
Right.
I'll contrast that with, say, Jeffrey Sutton, an appeals court judge from the Sixth Circuit, who is widely respected, but perhaps has a stain on his record as an appeals court judge who thought Obamacare did meet the constitutional test, so perhaps that ruled him out. But you see, that's why you would not expect to see him on the list. I don't know why Kavanaugh and Clement wouldn't be on the list.
Well, everybody's going to be gearing up their LexisNexis accounts to figure out if there are decisions here that will be of interest to the left or the right.